About 74,000 years ago, on the island of Sumatra, the earth tore itself open. A volcano called Toba erupted with a force almost beyond imagining, the largest volcanic explosion our planet has seen in more than 2 million years. It buried parts of India under a layer of ash several meters deep, thousands of kilometers away. And, according to one of the most dramatic theories in all of human prehistory, it may have very nearly wiped our species off the face of the earth, reducing all of humanity to just a few thousand survivors. If that is true, then every single human being alive today, all 8 of us, is descended from that tiny, desperate band who lived through the day the sky fell. But did it really happen that way? And if humanity truly came so close to the edge, how on earth did our ancestors survive? Today we are going to explore one of the most terrifying and fascinating moments in the human story, a moment when our entire species may have stood on the brink of extinction. Let us start with the eruption itself, because its scale is genuinely hard to grasp. Volcanologists measure eruptions on a scale of explosivity, and Toba sits at the very top, an 8, the highest category, a so-called super-eruption. To put that in perspective, it was vastly more powerful than any volcanic eruption in recorded human history. When Toba blew, it ejected an almost unbelievable volume of material, leaving behind a crater so enormous it is now a lake about 100 kilometers long. The ash it threw into the atmosphere spread across much of Asia, and traces of it have been found as far away as East Africa. This was not an ordinary eruption. It was one of the most violent geological events our planet has experienced in millions of years, and it happened while our ancestors were alive to witness it. Now here is where the famous and frightening theory comes in. For much of the last 30 years, many scientists supported what is called the Toba catastrophe hypothesis. The idea goes like this. When Toba erupted, it threw so much ash and sulfur into the sky that it blocked out the sun across much of the globe, triggering a volcanic winter, a sudden severe cooling that may have lasted years. Temperatures plunged, plants struggled to grow in the dim, cold conditions, food became scarce, and in this harsh, darkened world, human populations crashed. According to this theory, the global population of our species may have been reduced to as few as 10,000 individuals, or even fewer, scattered survivors clinging to life in a handful of refuges. Humanity, in this view, passed through the eye of a needle, a near-extinction event that almost ended our story before it truly began. And there is a haunting piece of evidence that seems to support this idea, written inside your own body. When scientists study the DNA of people alive today, they find something surprising. Human beings have remarkably low genetic diversity compared to many other species. In fact, all of humanity is genetically more similar than a single population of chimpanzees. This pattern is exactly what you would expect if our species had passed through a genetic bottleneck, a moment when our numbers dropped so low that most of our genetic variety was lost, and we all descended from the small group that made it through. For years, Toba seemed like the perfect suspect, the catastrophe that squeezed humanity down to a precious few. It was a powerful, cinematic story, our species nearly extinguished, surviving by the thinnest of margins and rebuilding from almost nothing. But here is where science does what science does best. It keeps asking questions. And in recent years, a growing body of evidence has begun to challenge this dramatic tale, and the picture has become far more interesting and far more nuanced. Because when archaeologists actually went digging for evidence of the catastrophe, what they found often did not match the apocalyptic story.
The most striking evidence comes from archaeological sites where scientists can dig down through the layers of time and find the actual Toba ash layer, a clear marker of the eruption. And, crucially, they can look at the layers just below the ash before the eruption and the layers just above it after the eruption. If Toba had truly devastated the human population, you would expect to see signs of human life vanishing after the ash fell, tools disappearing, sites abandoned. But at several sites, including locations in India and southern Africa, that is not what researchers found. Instead, the evidence suggests that humans were living in these places before the eruption and were still living there, still making tools, still going about their lives after it. At a site in South Africa, people on the coast appear to have continued thriving right through the period of the eruption, with no sign of catastrophic collapse. The humans, it seems, carried on. The climate models have been revised too. Newer, more sophisticated studies of how the eruption would have affected the global climate suggest that the cooling, while real, may have been far less severe and far less uniform than the original catastrophe theory proposed. Some regions in the northern hemisphere may have cooled significantly, but other parts of the world, particularly in the southern hemisphere and in Africa, where many of our ancestors lived, may have experienced much milder effects, or in some places almost none at all. The volcanic winter in this revised view was not a uniform global apocalypse, but a patchy, uneven event that hit some regions hard and largely spared others. And what about that genetic bottleneck, the low diversity written in our DNA? Here, too, the story has shifted. Many genetic studies have failed to find clear evidence of a population crash that lines up precisely with the timing of the Toba eruption. The bottleneck in human history may well be real, but it may have been caused by other factors, by the general challenges of the Ice Age, by the small size of the groups that migrated out of Africa, or by a combination of pressures spread over a long period, rather than by one single catastrophic eruption. The honest scientific position today is that the link between Toba and a near extinction of humanity is heavily debated, and many researchers now think the eruption was not the species-ending catastrophe it was once believed to be. So which is it? Did Toba nearly destroy us, or did our ancestors shrug it off? The truth, as so often in science, probably lies somewhere in between, and that in between is where the real lesson is found. There is no doubt that Toba was a genuinely massive event, and for the people living closest to it, in parts of Asia buried under ash, the consequences would have been severe, even devastating. Local populations may indeed have suffered terribly. But across the wider world, the evidence increasingly suggests that humanity as a whole did not simply collapse. Our ancestors endured, they adapted, they found ways to keep living through whatever climate disruption came their way. And this points to something genuinely inspiring about our species. Whether Toba pushed humanity to the brink or merely tested it, the outcome was the same. We survived. And we survived because of the very things that have always been our greatest strengths: our adaptability, our intelligence, our ability to cooperate and to solve problems. Faced with a changing, hostile world, our ancestors did what humans do best. They adjusted. They moved to where food could still be found. They relied on their tools, their knowledge, and each other. Where many other species would simply have perished, humans found a way through. The story of Toba, in the end, is not really a story of near extinction. It is a story of resilience. There is a comforting and powerful truth buried in all of this. Our ancestors lived through one of the most violent natural disasters in the history of the planet, and they came out the other side. They had no science, no technology as we know it, no warning, and no understanding of what was happening to their world, and still they endured.
The blood of those survivors runs in every one of us. We are quite literally the descendants of people who looked up at a sky, turned to ash and darkness, and refused to give up. The day the sky fell did not end the human story. In a way, it proved just how hard our story is to end.